The church bells tolled, but they weren't ringing for joy. They were a warning. Elias Cain stood at the edge of St. Augustine's courtyard, his polished shoes sinking into the damp grass, heart pounding like it might break free. Today was the day he'd either save his family or lose them forever. Elias, 28, had been the Cain family's anchor since he was old enough to understand sacrifice. Growing up in Rochester, New York, in a sprawling Victorian home that smelled of cedar and regret, he'd watched his parents' dreams crumble under debt and dysfunction. His mother, Diane, a painter with a laugh like wind chimes, had faded into silence after his father's gambling drained their savings. His older sister, Mara, 32, had her own battles. 2 kids, a deadbeat ex, and a diner job that barely paid the bills. And his younger brother, Toby, 19, was a dreamer with a guitar and no plan, teetering on the edge of trouble. Elias, the middle child, became the family bank, not just in money, but in hope, stability, and secrets. He'd worked 3 jobs through college, graduating with a finance degree from Syracuse while wiring cash to cover Mara's rent or Toby's bail. He never complained. He never broke. Even when Diane called at 2 a.m., sobbing about another foreclosure notice, Elias wired the funds, his own dreams of a life beyond Rochester buried under duty. They called him the fixer, their rock, but never asked who fixed him. No one knew about the nights he spent staring at the ceiling of his tiny apartment, wondering if he'd ever be enough. Until Julian Harper, 31, had crashed into Elias's life like a summer storm. Unexpected, electric, and impossible to ignore. A graphic designer from Brooklyn with a crooked smile and a heart that seemed to hold the world, Julian saw Elias in ways no one else did. Their first date, at a hole-in-the-wall taco joint in Syracuse, had ended with Julian sketching Elias's hands on a napkin, saying, "These hands carry too much. Let me hold them for a while." Elias, guarded and skeptical, had laughed it off, but Julian's warmth chipped away at his walls. 6 months later, they were inseparable, sharing late-night talks about art, family, and the courage it takes to live authentically. But Elias hadn't told his family about Julian. Not because he was ashamed, God, no, but because the Cains had a way of breaking anything beautiful. Mara, with her sharp tongue and sharper judgments, would call it a phase. Diane, fragile and devout, might retreat further into herself. And Toby might not care, but he'd sell the story for a quick buck. So Elias kept Julian a secret, meeting him in stolen moments, weekends in Brooklyn, quiet hikes in the Adirondacks, while the family leaned harder on their bank. The wedding was Mara's idea. Her best friend, Carla, was marrying a tech bro from Buffalo, and the Cains were invited to the lavish affair at a vineyard in the Finger Lakes. Mara had begged Elias to come, not for the celebration, but for the optics. "We need to look like a real family," she'd said, her voice tight. "You're the only one who can make us look good." Elias knew what she meant. Show up, smile, and pay for the open bar they couldn't afford. He'd agreed, like always, wiring $2,000 to cover the family's share. But this time he made a decision that would change everything. He invited Julian. The vineyard was a vision of opulence. Rows of grapevines stretching toward the horizon, fairy lights twinkling against the dusk. Elias stood at the edge of the reception, his navy suit crisp but his palms sweaty. Julian, in a light gray suit that made his blue eyes pop, stood beside him, their fingers brushing but not yet linked. "You sure about this?" Julian whispered, his voice steady but laced with concern. Elias nodded, though his stomach churned. He wasn't just introducing his boyfriend, he was challenging the unspoken rules of the Cain family. Mara spotted them first. Her red dress clung to her frame, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She strode over, wine glass in hand, her smile faltering as she noticed Julian. Elias, who's this? Her tone was polite but edged with suspicion, like she was sizing up a threat. This is Julian, Elias said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. My boyfriend. The word hung in the air like a grenade. Mara's eyes widened, her glass tilting slightly. Diane, standing nearby with a shawl draped over her shoulders, froze, her lips parting as if to speak but finding no words. Toby, slouched against a table with a beer, looked up, his expression unreadable. The chatter of the wedding faded, or maybe it was just Elias's world narrowing to this moment. Boyfriend, Mara repeated, her voice low but sharp. Since when do you have a boyfriend? Since I decided to stop hiding, Elias said, his hand finding Julian's. Their fingers intertwined, and Julian squeezed gently. A silent promise. I'm here. Elias's heart raced, but for the first time, it wasn't just fear. It was defiance. Diane stepped forward, her eyes glassy. Elias, honey, why didn't you tell us? Her voice was soft, but there was a crack in it, like she was holding back a storm. Because I didn't think you'd listen, Elias said, his words spilling out faster than he'd planned. I've been your bank, your fixer, your glue, but I'm also me, Mom, and this is who I am. The silence that followed was deafening. Mara's face hardened, Toby's gaze dropped to the ground, and Diane's hand trembled as she clutched her shawl. Julian stood firm, his presence a quiet strength. Elias had spent years carrying his family's weight, but tonight, he was carrying something else, the truth. And the truth, he realized, was heavier than any debt. The vineyard's fairy lights flickered like stars, but the warmth of the evening couldn't thaw the chill between Elias and his family. Mara's eyes, sharp as cut glass, darted between Elias and Julian. Her lips pressed into a thin line. This is Carla's day, she hissed, stepping closer. You couldn't wait to pull this stunt? Elias's jaw tightened. It's not a stunt, Mara. It's my life. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of years spent swallowing his own needs. Julian's hand in his was an anchor, keeping him from sinking into the familiar tide of guilt. Mara scoffed, tossing her hair. Your life? You're the one who's always got it together, Elias. You don't get to just change the script. She gestured vaguely at Julian, who stood quietly, his expression calm but watchful. What's this guy even know about us? About what we've been through? More than you think, Elias said, his voice steady. He knows I've been carrying you all since I was 16. He knows I've given up everything to keep this family afloat. Diane, still clutching her shawl, stepped between them, her voice trembling. Elias, please, let's not do this here. Her eyes flicked to the wedding guests, who were starting to glance their way, drawn by the tension. We're a family. We don't air our laundry in public. Elias felt a pang of guilt, but it was drowned out by something fiercer. I'm not airing anything, Mom. I'm just being honest. For once. He turned to Julian, whose blue eyes held a quiet strength. Julian's part of my life now, and I'm not hiding him to make you comfortable. Toby, who'd been silent until now, pushed off the table, his beer bottle dangling from his fingers. So what, you're gay now? His tone wasn't cruel, just blunt, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. At 19, Toby had a knack for saying whatever popped into his head. Consequences be damned. Elias met his brother's gaze. Yeah, Toby, I am, and I've been too scared to tell you because I didn't want to lose you. His voice cracked, betraying the fear he'd buried for years. Toby blinked, then shrugged, taking a swig of his beer. Cool. Whatever, man. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either, just Toby, dodging the weight of the moment like always. Mara, however, wasn't done. "You think this is easy for us?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You dropped this bomb, and we're supposed to just smile and clap? You're the one we depend on, Elias. You don't get to be selfish." The word hit like a slap. Selfish. Elias had spent his life being anything but. He'd paid for Mara's kids' school supplies, covered Diane's mortgage, bailed Toby out of jail. He'd buried his own dreams to keep them afloat. And now, standing up for himself was selfish? Julian spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. "He's not being selfish. He's being human." His Brooklyn accent was soft, but there was steel beneath it. "Elias has given you everything. Maybe it's time you let him have something for himself." Mara's eyes flashed, but before she could retort, Carla, the bride, appeared, her white gown glowing under the fairy lights. "Everything okay over here?" she asked, her smile tight. The tension was palpable, and Carla, ever the peacemaker, was trying to defuse it. "We're fine," Elias said, though his chest ached. "Just family stuff." Carla nodded, her eyes lingering on Julian's hand in Elias's. "Well, you're all welcome here. Let's keep the night happy. Okay?" She squeezed Mara's arm before gliding back to the dance floor, where her new husband was attempting a clumsy twirl. The confrontation fizzled, but the rift remained. Diane retreated to a table, her face pale, while Mara stormed off toward the bar. Toby wandered after her, leaving Elias and Julian alone under the weight of the moment. "You okay?" Julian asked, his thumb brushing over Elias's knuckles. Elias exhaled, his breath shaky. "I don't know. I thought they'd at least try to understand." Julian pulled him close, their foreheads touching. "They might. Give them time. You just shook their world, Eli. That's not small." Elias closed his eyes, letting Julian's warmth ground him. For years, he'd been the family bank, the one who fixed everything. But tonight, holding Julian's hand, he felt something new. The courage to demand more than duty. The courage to be seen. As the night wore on, the wedding continued. Laughter, clinking glasses, the hum of music. But for Elias, the real dance was just beginning. He'd opened a door, and there was no going back. The music pulsed through the vineyard, a slow jazz number that invited couples to sway under the stars. Elias and Julian stood on the edge of the dance floor, watching as guests twirled, their faces lit with joy. Elias wanted to feel that lightness, but his family's reactions weighed heavy, like stones in his pockets. Mara was at the bar, her back to them, her posture rigid. Diane sat alone, her shawl slipping off her shoulders, staring into her untouched wine. Toby had vanished, probably sneaking a smoke behind the vineyard's barn. Elias's chest tightened. He'd expected resistance, but not this, a fracture so deep it felt like betrayal. Julian tugged gently at his hand. "Dance with me," he said, his voice soft but insistent. His curly blonde hair caught the light, and his smile was a quiet challenge. "Choose us. Choose now." Elias hesitated, glancing at his family. "They're watching," he murmured. "Let them," Julian said, stepping closer. "You've spent your life worrying about their eyes. Tonight, let them see you." Elias's throat tightened, but he nodded. They stepped onto the dance floor, Julian's hand warm in his, guiding him into the rhythm. The music wrapped around them, and for a moment, it was just them, Elias, with his guarded heart, and Julian, with his fearless one. They swayed, their movements tentative at first, then fluid, as if their bodies had always known this dance. Julian's hand rested on Elias's waist, steady and sure, and Elias felt something loosen inside him, like a knot finally unraveling. Guests glanced their way, some with curiosity, others with warmth. A few older relatives whispered, their expressions unreadable, but Elias didn't care. Not tonight. Julian's breath was warm against his cheek, and for the first time in years, Elias felt like he was breathing too. The song ended, and they stopped, still holding each other. Elias caught Mara's gaze from across the room. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, but she didn't look away. It wasn't acceptance, but it was something, a crack in her armor, maybe. Diane approached them, her steps hesitant. "Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk? Alone?" Julian squeezed Elias's hand before letting go. "I'll be at the bar," he said, his tone light but his eyes watchful. He walked away, leaving Elias with his mother, whose frail frame seemed smaller under the weight of the moment. Diane clutched her shawl, her knuckles white. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "You've always been my strong one. My Elias. Why didn't you tell me?" Elias's chest ached. "I wanted to, Mom, but every time I tried, I saw you breaking. I couldn't add to that." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm not breaking now," she said, though her voice shook. "I'm just scared. For you. For us. The world isn't kind to people like me." Elias finished, his voice gentle but firm. "The world hasn't been kind to me either, Mom. But Julian is. He's my world now, too." Diane's lips trembled, and she reached for his hand, her touch fragile but warm. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "But I love you, Elias. I always will. It wasn't everything, but it was enough for now." Elias squeezed her hand, his eyes stinging. "I love you too, Mom." As Diane returned to her table, Mara approached, her expression still hard but less hostile. "You're really doing this, huh?" she said, crossing her arms. "Right in front of everyone?" "Yeah," Elias said, meeting her gaze. "I'm done hiding." Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't snap back. Instead, she glanced at Julian, who was laughing with a bartender, his ease a stark contrast to the Kane family's tension. "He makes you happy?" she asked, almost grudgingly. "Happier than I've ever been," Elias said, his voice raw with truth. Mara nodded just once, then turned away. It wasn't a blessing, but it wasn't a fight either. For Mara, that was progress. As the night deepened, Elias found Julian by the bar, his smile a beacon in the crowd. They stepped outside, away from the noise, into the cool night air. The vineyard stretched out before them, dark and quiet, the stars above bright enough to rival the fairy lights. "You did good tonight," Julian said, pulling Elias close. "You stood up for us." Elias leaned into him, his heart full and aching. "I'm scared, Jules. What if they never come around?" "Then we build our own family," Julian said, his voice steady. "But I think they will. They just need time to catch up to you." Elias closed his eyes, letting Julian's words settle over him. He'd always been the family bank, but tonight he'd invested in himself. And that, he realized, was worth everything. The vineyard's magic faded with the dawn, leaving Elias to face the fallout. The wedding had ended in a blur of toasts and laughter, but the Kane family's tension lingered like a bruise. Elias woke in his hotel room, Julian's arm draped over him, the morning light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, he let himself linger in the warmth of Julian's presence, but the weight of yesterday pressed against his chest. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Julian, and checked his phone. A text from Mara: "We need to talk. Breakfast at the diner. 8 a.m. No please, no warmth, just Mara, demanding as always." Elias sighed, rubbing his eyes. He'd hoped for a moment of peace, but the Kanes never let him rest. The diner, a greasy spoon on the outskirts of the Finger Lakes, smelled of coffee and bacon. Mara sat in a corner booth, her hair pulled back, her face bare of makeup. She looked tired, older than her 32 years, the weight of single motherhood etched into her frown lines. Diane was there too, her hands folded tightly on the table, her eyes red-rimmed. Toby was absent, probably sleeping off the night's successes. Elias slid into the booth, his stomach knotted. "Where's Toby?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. "Passed out at Carla's place," Mara said, her tone clipped. "He's fine. This isn't about him." Diane reached for Elias's hand, her touch tentative. "We didn't sleep much," she said softly. "After last night, we needed to see you." Elias braced himself. "Okay, say what you need to say." Mara leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "You blindsided us, Elias. You show up with this guy, no warning, and expect us to just roll with it? We're your family. You owe us more than that." Elias's jaw clenched. "Owe you? Mara, I've given you everything, money, time, my whole life. When do I get to stop owing?" Mara flinched, but her voice didn't soften. "You think you're the only one who's sacrificed? I'm raising 2 kids alone. Mom's barely holding it together. Toby's a mess. We've all been drowning, and you're the one who keeps us afloat. Now you're what? Walking away." "I'm not walking away," Elias said, his voice rising. "I'm asking you to see me, not just as your bank, but as your brother, your son." He looked at Diane, whose eyes were fixed on the table. "I'm gay, Mom. I love Julian, and I need you to be okay with that." Diane's lips trembled. "I'm trying, Elias. It's just hard. I was raised to believe certain things, but I don't want to lose you." "You won't," Elias said, his voice softening. "But I can't keep hiding to make you comfortable. I deserve to be happy too." Mara snorted, but there was less venom in it. "Happy, right? And what happens when this Julian guy bails? You're gonna pick up the pieces alone." "He's not bailing," Elias said, his voice firm. "He's been there for me in ways you never have. He sees me, Mara, not just what I can do for him." The words hung heavy, and for once, Mara didn't fire back. She leaned back, her arms crossed, her eyes distant. Diane reached for Elias's hand again, squeezing it gently. "I want to meet him," she said. "Properly. Can we do that?" Elias nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, Mom, we can do that." Breakfast ended with no grand resolutions, but it was a start. Mara didn't apologize, but she didn't fight either. Diane's quiet promise to try felt fragile but real. Elias left the diner feeling lighter, though the road ahead was still uncertain. Back at the hotel, Julian was awake, sketching on a notepad, his hair a messy halo. "How'd it go?" he asked, looking up. "They're not there yet," Elias said, sitting beside him. "But they're not gone either." Julian set the sketch aside, a rough drawing of Elias laughing, his eyes bright. "That's more than you had yesterday," he said, pulling Elias close. "You're doing this, Eli. You're showing them who you are." Elias leaned into him, his heart steady for the first time in days. The family bank was still open, but now Elias was setting his own terms. And that, he realized, was a kind of freedom. Weeks passed, and Rochester's autumn settled in, painting the city in hues of amber and crimson. Elias and Julian returned to their lives, Elias to his finance job, Julian to his freelance design work. But the wedding had shifted something fundamental. Elias was no longer just the family bank. He was a man demanding to be seen. Diane kept her promise. She invited Elias and Julian to dinner at the old Victorian house, a gesture that felt both brave and brittle. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and Diane's lavender candles, a faint echo of happier times. Mara was there, her kids in tow, their chatter filling the awkward silences. Toby showed up late, his guitar slung over his shoulder, his grin sheepish but genuine. Julian was a natural, charming Diane with stories of his Brooklyn art scene and teasing Toby about his questionable taste in music. Mara watched, her expression guarded but softening when Julian helped her son with a drawing. Elias watched it all, his heart caught between hope and fear. This was his family, flawed and fractured, but trying. After dinner, Diane pulled Elias aside, her eyes searching his. "I've been reading," she said, her voice low, "about people like you. I don't understand it all, but I'm learning. For you." Elias's eyes stung. "Thank you, Mom," he said, pulling her into a hug. It was the first time in years he'd felt like her son, not her savior. Mara lingered as the others cleared the table, her arms crossed. "I'm not gonna lie," she said, her voice gruff. "This is weird for me, but you look different, lighter. I don't know if it's him or you, but I don't hate it." Elias smiled, a real one. "It's both of us, Mara, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm still your brother." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Good, 'cause I'd miss you, you know." Toby, true to form, didn't say much, but as he left, he clapped Elias on the shoulder. "You're all right, man, and Julian's cool. Don't screw it up." Elias laughed, the sound raw and free. "I'll try not to." That night, as he and Julian walked through Rochester streets, the city felt different. Less like a cage, more like a place he could belong. Julian's hand was warm in his, their steps in sync. "You did it, Eli," Julian said, his voice soft. "You showed them who you are, and they're still here." Elias stopped, pulling Julian close under a streetlight. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me the courage to stop hiding." Julian smiled, his eyes bright. "You had it all along. I just helped you see it." They kissed, the world fading around them, and Elias felt a truth settle deep in his bones. He was more than the family bank. He was a son, a brother, a partner. A man who loved fiercely and deserved to be loved in return. His family wasn't perfect, but they were his, and they were learning to love all of him. As they walked on, hand in hand, Elias realized the real victory wasn't just his family's acceptance. It was his own. He'd spent years carrying their weight, but now he was carrying something far more precious: himself.